Aum Sairam. Hara Hara Shankara, Jaya Jaya Shankara. Episode 3. Shri Mahaswami, the Sage with Eyes of Light, the Diary of a Seeker of Truth. Dr.Serge Demetrian. Dear devotees, now we shall continue to heed to the remaining pages of the preface. The further we advanced in our work, the more I tried to draw Serge Demetrian's attention to the excessive number of pages and to the fact that the book was becoming too bulky. His reply was that the book was already a summary, and should he put on paper all that he had experienced with his master, one would arrive at several volumes. This book was first written in French, which was Serge Demetrian's second language after his native Romanian. Once the French version was completed, he translated it into English. Afterwards, our friend Christopher Quilke, editor of The Mountain Path, the magazine from Sri Ramanashramam, managed to convince him that the time was ripe to publish it. And when Serge Demetrian finally agreed, Christopher Quilke proceeded to meticulously revise and correct the English translation with finesse and perseverance. The reader will notice that Serge Demetrian's writing style is very precise and his descriptions are meticulous. This is due to the fact that his master taught him mainly through silence, spiritual silence, and that there was hardly any verbal exchange between master and disciple. This is why a conscious observation of his inner experiences as well as of the places, the gestures and acts of Shri Mahaswami became of significant importance. Furthermore, the images that tend to emerge as if from a painting incite the reader to travel through ancient India, as it was thousands of years ago when disciples would live with their master or follow him everywhere without any apparent goal. The time came when Serge Demetrian wished to take me to the places where he had dwelled for months with his master and where certain things had occurred that were of the utmost importance to him. So we set out for Karveti Nagar. There we met old devotees of Shri Mahaswami, and I witnessed the joys of reuniting and sharing the memories of time spent with the sage. We sat on the steps of the lotus pond, which had played such a decisive role, and before my eyes there appeared scenes of all that I had read and reread in Demetrian's writings. His experiences with Shri Mahaswami around the pond, the hut where he stayed, the tree that gave him shelter for meditation, the little temple of Krishna at the other end of the alley. On another occasion, we visited Shivasthana, a locality close to Kanchipuram, where Shri Mahaswami, to Demetrian's dismay, had retired to a dwelling which reminded Demetrian of a prison. Nevertheless, in this place he had undergone some very intense spiritual experiences. When we were there, although an atmosphere of almost palpable peace prevailed, it was sad to see this place, which was sanctified by the physical presence of the great sage and was now totally abandoned. I had even expressed the wish to come one day for a big cleanup. A few years later, I went there again, and to my delight, The locale had been transformed into a small, neat, and clean museum. Unfortunately, Serge Demetrian was no longer of this world. He would have been so happy to discover these new arrangements, which, all in all, are proof of the esteem and veneration that devotees have for this holy place. Often I would spend short stays with him in Kanchipuram, where he would take me into the mutt, the surrounding temples, and other places related to Sri Mahaswami and whose access is often denied to foreigners. Thanks to Serge Demetrian, I was able to learn the customs, the most traditional Hindu rites, as well as Hindu values, philosophy, and symbols. He also had great reverence for Ramana Maharishi. Sri Mahaswami had said, Ramana Maharishi and I, we are one. So, he spent his last years exclusively in Tiruvannamalai near my home until his death on the 4th of October 2018 in his 96th year. Adopted by India and its people, Serge Demetrian in turn had fully adopted their customs and traditions. One could almost say that he had become more Indian than the Indians. He spoke very little of his past in Romania, the country where he was born in 1923. However, I remember that he had encountered India very early in his life, at the age of 17, through Paul Brunton's book, A Search in Secret India. Due to this encounter, he began to study Indian culture, philosophy, and spirituality. He went on to translate books, write articles, and participate in seminars on this subject, and all this at the same time as he pursued his medical studies. He practiced as a medical doctor at first, but when interest in studying and writing about India became more important, he switched to teaching medicine at the university in order to have more time to pursue his Indian studies. He was unable to travel to India because of the totalitarian regime that prevailed in Romania at the time. But when Indira Gandhi came on a state visit to Bucharest in 1967, Serge Demetrian, then one of the few Indologists in Bucharest and a great friend of the Indian ambassador, was invited to meet a professor from the University of Madras who had come with the Prime Minister. He was then immediately invited to an international conference that would be held in Madras in early 1968. It was the ideal situation to leave the country, which was still strictly under the yoke of the communist regime. As if by some miracle, he got a passport and, at the airport, he handed the key of his house to a friend, whispering in his ear, I will not be coming back. This is where the story of a seeker with a profound love for truth begins, and the reader can follow in this work the thread of his quest and ardent devotion. The existence of Serge Demetrian in my life was a precious help in my spiritual journey. Humorously calling himself an old hand at all this, he gladly cleared up my doubts and set me back on the path as soon as I deviated from it. He was a model of excellence for me and for everyone who knew him. Every gesture in his daily life was linked to the higher reality. Everything, thoughts, feelings, words, were an offering to the divine, and this was reflected in his conduct, which was exemplary. Often, when asked why he didn't accept disciples, he replied that it was not his mission. His mission was undoubtedly to light our way with this testimony of a life entirely devoted to the search for the truth. He didn't want to take on the role of a guru in any way, but as far as I was concerned, he was that finger pointing relentlessly to the highest. All of our conversations ended with the phrase, "Think of Bhagavan." It was his credo and it still resonates in my ears. Narayana, that was his Indian name, harbored an unbounded devotion to Sri Mahaswami, whose presence permeated him all the time, and this spiritual intensity was transmitted subtly as an encouragement to continue our quest. Of uncommon humility and sincerity, he never acted without the inner permission of his master. Perhaps that is one of the reasons it took so long to publish this book. Probably he didn't have the inner permission to release it during his lifetime. In his last days, although he must have suffered excruciating pains, he seemed calm and peaceful, apparently not feeling his body anymore. So totally absorbed was he in his beloved Sri Mahaswami. Shanti Devi. Devotees, let us close this episode here and shall continue the rest in the coming episode, bowing at the holy feet of the Gurus. Aum Sairam. Hara Hara Shankara, Jaya Jaya Shankara.